My son put a white envelope on the kitchen table and pushed it across to me with 2 fingers. "There's 150 in there," he said. "The bus to Nampa leaves at 9:40. It was Thursday, September 22nd, 2011. The envelope was not sealed. He had folded it once down the middle, the way you fold something you mean to put in a shirt pocket and then think better of. I looked at it. I did not pick it up. He stood by the door with his car keys in his hand, and under the floor the furnace came on. 15 years later, I stood on that same piece of ground on a Monday in October. There was a white tent, 40 folding chairs, 6 shovels somebody had spray-painted gold and pushed into a pile of dirt, a backhoe dumped there the night before. My son was shaking hands with the mayor of Meridian, Idaho, and a reporter was writing his name down. While 40 people watched, I walked past all of it, out to the end of a gravel lane, and I closed a gate. I did not say a word. I did not have to. Before I go on, do me a favor. Put in the comments where you are listening from. And if you have ever had a child hand you a number instead of an answer, you already know how this starts. Stay with me, because the number is not the part that hurts. My name is Arthur R. Nyquist. I was 61 years old that Thursday. I am 76 now. I spent 40 years as a property loss adjuster. I started in 1971 as a claims trainee for a regional carrier out of Boise, and I retired March 31st, 2011, 6 months before my son handed me that envelope. 40 years of walking into other people's houses on the worst day they ever had and writing down a number. I was good at it because I never argued with anybody. I measured. Standing in that kitchen with my son waiting by the door, I was still doing it. A stain in the northeast corner of the ceiling the size of a dinner plate. Shingles with 4 winters left in them. Replacement cost near $190,000, a number I had run in my head the previous spring for no reason at all. I could put a price on every object in that room. I could not put one on the envelope. My wife was Ruth. We were married in 1972 and she died September 4th, 2009, and I am not going to spend your time on that today except to tell you one thing about her. In 1984, she gave me a brass barometer. It hung by the kitchen door for 25 years, and every morning of my working life, I tapped the glass with my knuckle on the way out to the truck, because a man paid to look at storm damage likes to know what is coming. That morning it read change. Now the money, because how you feel about the rest of this depends on it. Kevin came to see me in November of 2009, 2 months after the funeral. He was 34, with a brokerage in Meridian with his name on the sign, and 2009 was not a year to have your name on a sign in Idaho. He needed $40,000. Ruth's life insurance had come through in October. $52,000 and change. I had not touched a dollar of it, because touching it meant deciding what it was for, and I was not ready to decide what my wife was for. I wrote him a check that afternoon. No note, no payment schedule, nothing on paper. He asked if I wanted him to write something up, and I told him no. I said, "Your mother would rather it kept somebody's lights on than sat in a bank." He hugged me on the porch. He had not done that since he was a teenager. 2 years later, same table, $150. On August 12, 2011, a notary came to the house. A woman in her 40s with a rolling bag and a laminated card clipped to her jacket. Kevin put pages in front of me and told me where to sign. He called it a refinance. He said the rate had come down almost 2 points, and he had handled the whole thing so I would not have to sit in a bank for an afternoon. I signed in 9 places. I did not read a single page. 40 years of policy language, endorsements, exclusions. I once denied a $300,000 claim on the strength of one sentence in a vacancy provision that the insured's own attorney read past twice. I could find the trap in a homeowner's policy the way other men find a wrong note in a song. And I signed 9 pages in my own kitchen without putting on my glasses. The house sold September 30th, 2011, $268,000, paid off in 1997, 2.3 acres, with a gravel lane running back off Ustick Road and a culvert crossing the irrigation ditch that my father-in-law poured in 1968. Remember the lane. That is all I am going to say about it right now. That Thursday morning I did not take the envelope and I did not argue. I asked him for one thing. I asked if I could have a box. He came back from the garage with an empty carton with Florida oranges printed on the lid. I put 3 photographs in it, and a leather notebook from the desk drawer. Then I lifted the barometer off its nail and set it on top, face up, and closed the flaps. Then I picked up the envelope after all and put it in my coat pocket. I did not open it for 15 years. I am going to tell you what was in it and who was sitting across the table when I finally spent it. But that comes at the end. The bus did leave at 9:40. I was not on it. There is a motel on Fairview Avenue with a sign shaped like an arrow. $54 a night. I carried the orange box up the outside stairs and sat on the end of the bed with my coat still on. I was not broke that night. I had a pension and $12,000 in a credit union 4 blocks away. By Friday morning, I had $6.14. Among those 9 pages I signed in August, there was a power of attorney. A man does not go from $12,000 to $6 in 6 weeks by accident, and somebody had needed it faster than they needed me to keep believing anything. Saturday morning, I walked back to the house. There were cars parked down both shoulders of Eustic. They had set 4 folding tables on the front lawn, and a piece of poster board was zip-tied to the mailbox post with estate sale. 8 in the morning. Saturday written on it in black marker. I stood at the end of my own gravel lane and counted 11 people on the grass. Ruth's dishes were on the second table with masking tape price stickers. Her sewing machine, the singer her mother gave her, sat on the grass with a piece of tape on the case that said 25. A woman in a windbreaker was talking to my daughter-in-law about it, and I watched Sheila hold up both hands, and the woman got it for $12. But the sewing machine is not what I remember most. What I remember most is Marlene Kowalczyk. She lived across the road for 26 years. Ruth drove her to chemotherapy in 2006, every other Wednesday for 5 months. In our car, on our gas. She was standing by the first table with a coffee cup, and she looked up and saw me at the end of the lane, and she turned around. She did not hurry. She turned like a person who had just remembered something on the other table, and she put her back to me and stayed that way. And I understood, standing there, that somebody had already talked to these people. There had been a version of events circulating on this road for a while, and it had reached everybody except me. Kevin came around the side of the garage with a lamp under his arm. I asked him one question. What did I sign in August? He did not deny anything. I spent 40 years across tables from people lying to me about a claim, and they all denied. Denial is what a person does when they still think the story is up for grabs. He set the lamp down, reached into his jacket, and handed me a piece of paper folded in 3, the way you hand somebody a menu. A letter. 1 page, handwritten, dated June 14th, 2011. It said I was finding the property too much to keep up, that I wanted to move somewhere smaller, and that I was asking my son to handle the sale of the house and the management of my accounts because I did not want to deal with the paperwork. It was in my handwriting. It was signed Arthur R. Nyquist. Dad, he said, you asked us to do this. In June. You sat right there on the porch and asked us. I looked at that signature for about 8 seconds. The ink was the same weight the whole way through. When you sign your own name, the pen comes down hard at the start and lifts off light at the end. And there are 2 places in Nyquist where my pen leaves the paper because I have been signing that name since 1968, and my hand does it without me. There were no lift points. 1 stroke, even pressure, start to finish. Nobody signs their name. People draw other people's names. I said that sentence in a deposition in 1994, and I stood on my own lawn with the proof of it in my hand and did not say 1 word about it. And you are not going to like the reason. Because Sheila had come out onto the front step. She did not cry. I have heard people tell these stories, and there is always crying, and there was none. She stood on the top step with her arms folded and spoke at a normal volume, which was worse, because it meant she did not care who heard. She said, "We have been carrying him for 2 years, and nobody in this family has once said thank you." And I watched 11 people on my lawn adjust. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. There is a thing that happens to a crowd where the weight shifts, and the man standing at the end of the driveway in a canvas coat stops being a man who lost his house and becomes a problem. 2 decent people have been handling quietly for 2 years. Kevin was watching me, waiting, and I said, out loud, in front of all of them, "You're right. I don't remember June. I have to be honest with you about that sentence, because if I let you believe it was clever, I have lied to you in the first 20 minutes. I did not say it because I had a plan. I did not have a plan. I said it because I had a forged letter in my hand and 40 years of knowing exactly what it was. And I understood that if I stood on that grass and said the word forgery in front of 11 people, every single one of them would go home and tell somebody that Art Nyquist had lost it. The truth was not available to me that morning. It was in my hand, and I could not use it. So I handed him back his letter, and I watched his shoulders come down about an inch, and I walked back down my lane past the cars. On Monday, I walked into the Meridian Police Department and sat in a plastic chair for 40 minutes. A young woman at the window asked twice if I needed help, and both times I said I was waiting on somebody. I sat there working out the sentence I would have to say when it was my turn, and the sentence was, "My son stole my house," and I could not get it out of my mouth. I could not make it a true thing by saying it in a room. I got up and walked out, and it was 15 years before I said that sentence to another human being. In November, a letter came to the motel, forwarded from the post office. It was from the Ada County assessor. It was a bill for $96. I rented a back room on 12th Avenue South in Nampa, $760 a month, shared bathroom at the end of the hall, 10 feet by 12. I set the orange box on the dresser. There was already a nail in the wall above it, left by whoever had the room before me. At about the height a man hangs a thing he wants to look at. I hung the barometer on it. That Monday I opened a new account at a different credit union. Then I typed a revocation of power of attorney on a library computer, drove it to a notary in a shipping store, and recorded it with the county for $15. 11 minutes, and I did not tell anybody I had done it. That was the entire war I fought in 2011. Now, 15 years. I am going to give you 3 days out of them, because a man's decade is not interesting, and I am not going to pretend mine was. March of 2015. $38 for 100 business cards. No logo, because I did not know what a logo was for. By the following March, I had handed out 3. But one of the 3 was a lawyer in Caldwell with a water loss he could not make sense of, and he called me back in June, and again in November, and he gave my name to a man in Boise. That is the whole mechanism. People say the trick is believing in yourself. The trick is the second phone call. October of 2019. Federal courthouse in Boise. An $8.4 million dispute over a compressor failure, and 300,000 pounds of spoiled product. I was on the stand 2 hours and 10 minutes, and a lawyer 40 years younger than me tried for an hour to make me say the word probably, and I did not say it. Here is the part I want you to hold on to. A federal trial transcript is a public document. Anybody can order one. And a trade magazine out of Chicago wrote 600 words about that case in January of 2020, and they spelled my name right. Arthur R. Nyquist. If you had typed those 3 words into a search bar any time after the winter of 2020, you would have found me, not a photograph. A transcript, a paragraph in a trade magazine, and a phone number for a 2-room office on Chinden Boulevard. 15 years and nobody typed it. Then, somebody did. Before I get there, I owe you an answer, because I know what you are thinking. Nampa to Meridian is 15 miles. How does a man live 15 miles from his son for 15 years and never run into him in a parking lot? Partly it is the work. I did commercial losses and testimony. Kevin sold houses, 2 different worlds that use the same word. Mostly it was on purpose. There were 3 places I did not go. I did not go back to the church on Meridian Road, where we were married and where Ruth's service was held. I did not shop at the Albertsons on Fairview, which was hers for 30 years. And I did not go out to the cemetery. That one is the ugliest thing I will tell you about myself. When Ruth died, I ordered a companion marker. 1 stone, 2 names, because I was not going to have her lying under a stone by herself with a blank space beside her like an empty chair. Hers was finished. Mine had my name and 1950, and then nothing. I thought it was the last decent thing I would ever get to do for her. And after September of 2011, I could not make myself drive out there. So I did not visit my wife's grave for 15 years. Not because of the stone, because of what I would have had to say to her standing in front of it. Now the $96. I called the county, and a woman named Dolores read it off her screen. Parcel number ending 0041. A strip of ground, 20 feet wide, 811 feet long, running from Eustick Road back to where the house used to be. It is the gravel lane I drove in and out of for 34 years. When my father-in-law had the ground surveyed in 1968, that strip got its own legal description, separate from the home parcel, because of the culvert crossing the irrigation ditch. There is no conspiracy in it. It was a surveyor doing his job in 1968. And in August of 2011, the deed put in front of me described the home parcel and did not describe the lane. If you have gotten the idea that I held that ground back on purpose, you have the wrong man in your ears. I did not keep it out of the sale. Nobody put it in. Nobody put it in because in 2011 it was worth nothing. 1/3 of an acre of gravel you cannot build a shed on. The buyers got the house and a driveway they were using every day, and nobody on either side of that closing table gave the lane 1 second of thought. I paid $96 a year for 15 years for a piece of ground I believed was worthless. $1,440, all told. I paid it because it had my name on it, and because in 40 years of claims work I watched people lose things they were sure they could not lose. And every time there was a small thing they stopped paying attention to first. And every January I sent a letter to Ed Halverson, who farmed the ground behind the old place and had used that lane since the Nixon administration. 1 page. It said Ed had my permission to use the lane and the permission could be withdrawn at any time. He signed it and mailed it back, and he thought I was being funny about it. Here is why a man does that. A neighbor who uses your road for 20 years without permission can end up owning the right to use it forever, and he does not have to ask, and he does not have to pay. That is the law in Idaho. A neighbor who signs a piece of paper every January never can. That is what I had, and I did not know I had anything at all. In the first week of October 2026, the phone rang in my office, and there was a young man on the other end having trouble with his breathing. He said, "Is this Arthur Nyquist, the one from Meridian?" He was sitting in the chair by the window with a clear plastic folder flat on his knees and both hands on top of it, the way you hold something on a bus. I knew the chin before anything else. Ruth had a square chin with a shallow line down the middle of it, and so does the boy. I said, "You're Ethan." He said, "Yes, sir." 22 years old, about 160 pounds, which is a young man who has not eaten a real meal since he moved out. Work boots that had never been in mud. Here is how he found me, and it is the part I still turn over at night. When somebody applies to rezone ground in Idaho, notice of the hearing has to go by mail to every property owner within 300 feet of it. Somebody has to pull that list from the county and type the names into a letter, and that somebody is whoever is cheapest. In August, that was Ethan. He had left school in his sophomore year to work for his father. There were 31 names on the list. He got to number 19, and it said Arthur R. Nyquist. He thought it was a different Nyquist. Then he did the thing everybody under 30 does without thinking, which is that he typed it into a search bar. He said, "It took me 6 weeks to call." I asked him why 6 weeks, and he said this, and I am going to give it to you the way he said it, because I could not improve on it. Because there's a stone out at Cloverdale with your name on it. 1950 and then nothing. I've been putting flowers on it since I was 8 years old. Nobody ever told me it was a lie. Nobody ever told me it was true either. Now, nobody faked a death certificate. Nobody stood at a graveside over an empty box. I bought that stone myself in October of 2009 and paid $2,800 for it. Nobody forged anything. Nobody had to. A boy of 8 was taken to a cemetery and shown a stone with his grandmother's name on it and his grandfather's name on it, and the adults standing around him let him work out the rest on his own. And then, for 15 years, not one of them corrected him. That is not a crime. There is no statute for it. I have thought about it a great deal, and I have not gotten anywhere with it. Then he opened the plastic folder. He had brought things out of a banker's box from his father's storage unit, which he had been told to shred in September, and had not. Old listing printouts. A 2013 desk calendar, and a 2-page declaration from a carrier I worked with for 40 years. A homeowner's policy covers a house somebody lives in. When a house sits empty, the carrier endorses it over to a vacant property form. Page 1 was a request for that endorsement, signed Arthur R. Nyquist, dated August 12, 2011. Page 2 showed it effective, September 19, 2011. Sit with those 2 dates because I did. August 12th is the morning the notary came to my kitchen. So one of those 9 pages, or a tenth I never saw, told my insurance company the house I was living in would be empty starting September 19th. Somebody wrote down the date I would be gone. 5 weeks before I was gone. You cannot pick a vacancy date out of the air. You pick it off a closing schedule, which means that on August 12, while I sat at my kitchen table being told about interest rates, there was already a buyer and already a closing date, and the house was already sold. I signed those pages believing I was choosing something. There was nothing left to choose. And there is one more thing on that page. From September 19th to September 22, I slept 3 nights in that house, under a policy that told the carrier nobody was living there. If a wire had shorted in that ceiling, they would have denied the claim for misrepresentation, and they would have been right to. I denied a $300,000 loss in 1994 on one sentence in a vacancy provision, and I went home that night and slept fine. Somebody put me in a house with no coverage on it and did not mention it. I do not think that was the plan. I do not think anybody sat down and hoped the wiring would go. I think nobody thought about me at all. I think I was a line on a schedule. Now here is the part I want you to pay attention to, and it is not the paperwork. I got a legal pad and built a timeline. 11 lines. Date on the left, event in the middle, what document proves it on the right. June 14th through September 30th, 2011. Ending at a closing for $268,000. 40 minutes, 2 phone calls, 1 document off the county website, and I did not raise my voice once. Ethan sat in that chair and watched me do it and did not say a word. I never told that boy I was not confused. A man who tells you his mind is clear has already handed you the argument. I just worked in front of him the way I used to work in front of juries, and whatever he had been told about me for 15 years came apart on its own. He left a little after 7. I want to tell you about the next hour and then we will go on. I did not turn the lamp on. I sat in that office in the dark with the legal pad in front of me and the traffic going by on Chinden, and I cried the way I have not cried since the hospital. Not about the house. Not one tear about that house. About a stone I picked out myself, with my own name on it, that a little boy put flowers on for 15 years. About the fact that I did not know he did that. That there was a child standing in the grass at Cloverdale in the wind, being good about a man who was 15 miles away and answering his phone. And about Kevin at 9 years old. I used to take him with me on Saturdays. He rode in the passenger seat with a sandwich in wax paper, and I would go up on a roof and chalk the test squares, and he would eat and watch. On the way home, he would ask me what the number was, and he would say it out loud to himself like it was a score. That boy sat in my truck about 200 times. I do not know where he went. At some point I got up and tapped the glass on the barometer with my knuckle, because that is what I do, and it does not mean anything. Then I turned on the lamp. He had left the folder on the desk. Underneath the insurance declaration was a stapled document, 40-some pages, a commercial loan package with a bank's name on the cover. I turned to the signature block on page 14. Ethan A. Nyquist, guarantor. I drove out to Meridian on a Saturday morning, which is the one day an old man sitting in a parked car looking at farm ground is invisible in Idaho. The house was gone. Not damaged, not empty. Scraped. Somebody had run a machine over 22 acres and taken the trees, the outbuildings, the shelter belt Ruth's father planted in 1971, down to bare dirt with tracks in it. There was a sales trailer near the road, and a sign. Nyquist Crossing, 84 homes, spring 2027. He put our name on it. The young woman inside called me sir and gave me a folder. I asked the questions a retired man asks, then opened the site plan across the steering wheel. 84 lots, 6 phases, a clubhouse, and one way in. Every driveway fed onto a loop. The loop fed onto a single road, and that road ran out to Ustick along a corridor drawn in gray on the left edge of the map. The gravel lane. Now I have to back up, because Ethan had brought me the rest of that banker's box, and I had called a man I had not spoken to in 6 years. Franklin Teague is 68. 30 years as a fraud investigator for 2 carriers and a state task force, retired to a place outside Kuna where he keeps 11 hives. He is the only man I know who reads faster than I do. He went through the box for 2 hours and did not say much. Then he pushed 1 page across to me. A letter from the Idaho Real Estate Commission, dated August 3, 2011, telling Kevin's brokerage it had been selected for an examination of its trust account. 9 days before the notary came to my kitchen. Client money that comes into a brokerage does not belong to the brokerage. It sits in a trust account, and it is not the broker's to touch. The account was short $221,000. Franklin said, "Art, he didn't sell your house to get rich. He sold it to stay out of prison." Everything I believed since 2011 had a shape, and the shape was greed. I had lived inside that story so long, I had furniture in it. The real one is worse. Greed you can be angry at. Greed means somebody looked at you and decided you were worth less than the thing they wanted. Desperation means they did not look at you at all. It means a man sat down on a Tuesday night in August with a letter from the state on his desk and went through what he could reach, and there was one asset with no mortgage, no lawyer, and no second signature required. It happened to be his father. The money closed September 30th. The examination happened in November. The account balanced. Nobody ever knew. Then he put the brokerage back together and did what a lot of men in this valley did, which is that he stopped selling farm ground and started buying it. 7 parcels over 4 years, assembled into 22 acres. The first one he ever bought was ours. He built the rest around us. The project was financed with a $6.5 million construction loan out of a bank in Boise, drawn in stages. A bank does not lend that to a company with nothing in it. It wants a human being on the paper, somebody who signs personally, so that when the entity fails, there is still a person left to sue. Kevin moved everything he owned into Sheila's name in 2023. It is all recorded and public, and it took me one afternoon. They gave Ethan 2% of the company for his 22nd birthday and called it getting him started. And on page 14, a boy who left college in his sophomore year signed a continuing guarantee for $6.5 million. If that project failed, Kevin was untouchable, and Sheila was untouchable, and the bank would go looking for the only Nyquist left on the paper. The thing that happened to me in 2011 was going to happen again in 2027 to a boy who had been putting flowers on a stone with my name on it. I lost a house. He would lose the next 30 years. That was the night I stopped thinking about 2011. Franklin said what he was always going to say, standing up with his coat half on. Attorney General. Elder Abuse Unit. Monday morning. "I will drive you myself." I told him no. And I have to be honest, because I have heard men tell stories like this, and there is always a reason they could not go to the law, and usually the reason is thin. Mine was not that I could not. The criminal side of 2011 is gone, because Idaho gives you 5 years on a forgery and we are 15 out. But the civil side was probably still alive, and there is a lawyer in Boise who would have taken it. I gave him 3 numbers instead. That case takes 3 to 4 years, and I have watched enough from the witness chair to know it is never 2. I am 76, and I have my father's heart, and my father was 74. And the bank's first draw funds 21 days after the groundbreaking, which is the day the boy's signature stops being paper and becomes a debt with his name on it. I said, "Frank, the law is a good road. It is just not a fast one, and I do not have much road left." He did not accept it. He was answering a different question than the one in front of me. Monday, I pulled a certified copy of the 2011 deed. The legal description runs 11 lines and ends with, containing 2.3 acres, more or less. The lane is not in it. It walks right up to the east edge of that gravel and turns. I am not claiming that ground. I own it, recorded, assessed, and paid, and a title examiner can confirm it in 4 minutes without a judge agreeing with me. That is the difference between a claim and a fact. I did not call my son, or the bank, or the mayor, or the newspaper. Every one of those is an old man making an accusation, and an accusation is a thing people get to decide about. I sent 1 letter to the title company, 10 sentences. I am the owner of record of parcel 0041, taxes paid, copies enclosed. Any permission ever extended for that parcel was personal and revocable and never ran with any adjoining land. 15 signed agreements enclosed. No easement of record burdens it, and I have granted none. Then I recorded a notice of revocation of license, so it would sit in the chain of title and nobody would have to take my word for anything. $15. Here is why that letter is the entire weapon. A bank does not lend on a promise. It lends against a title policy, and a lender's policy on a subdivision has to ensure access, because a house nobody can legally drive to is not collateral. So the whole thing runs through one title officer in Boise who never met my son and never met me. I did not need to stop him. I needed to make it impossible for a woman I have never met to sign her name. Franklin asked why my son could not buy 20 feet somewhere else. North is the irrigation ditch, which means a permit, an engineer, and a season. East is the railroad. That leaves the neighbor's frontage, and he owns 30 feet. The highway district wants 50 to accept a public street, and my 20 is what makes 50. And a driveway will not save him, because the city code says a driveway serves 6 houses, not 84. 6. Then Franklin said, he could just offer to buy it from you. I told him he would not. Frank, he is going to send a lawyer to prove he already owns it. He has never in his life paid for something he thought he could take. That same week, the Real Estate Commission opened a 14-day examination of my son's brokerage and froze the trust account. I did not call anybody. The commission examines brokerages on a rotation, and his number came up in a bad year, the same way it came up in a bad year in August of 2011. Ethan told me there was a stranger in the conference room. That is how I found out. If I had picked up a phone and sent the state after my own son, I would not be telling you this story. I would be telling you a different one, and you would be right to think less of me. I closed a road on my own land. That is all I ever did. 2 days later, Ethan sent me a photograph of a computer screen. An email from the title company to the bank, subject line, Exception 14, Access. I was not on the distribution list. Nobody in that email had any idea who I was. That is the best I felt in 15 years, and it lasted about 4 days. It came apart at 3 in the afternoon on Tuesday, October 20, and it came apart the way these things do, which is that nobody made a mistake. A paralegal at the title company called my son's office to verify ownership on parcel 0041. That is her job. The girl at the front desk was carrying 2 boxes of files when the phone rang, and she put it on speaker so she could set them down. 7 people in that office. Kevin in the conference room doorway with a cup of coffee, and the paralegal's voice came out of that speaker at conversational volume and said, "Recorded owner is Arthur R. Nyquist, N as in November, and he's current on taxes through this year." Ethan was standing at the copier 8 feet away. He called me that night and would not give me anything for a while. Finally, he said one thing, and it is the only description of my son I have from that entire month. He said, "Dad put the cup down with both hands." A man who is not in trouble sets a cup down with one hand and keeps talking. 2 things came out of that call, and both were bad for me. The first is that I was 13 days early. I wanted to be a line in a legal description, not a person in the story. Now, 7 people in a real estate office knew the old man was alive and owned the road. The second was worse. His lawyer moved that same afternoon, in the only direction left. He asserted a prescriptive easement. 20 years of open, continuous use of that lane, adverse to the owner, running with the land and binding on me. That is a real argument, and I do not want you thinking it was frivolous. A lane driven for 58 years, gravel a school bus turned around on, a mail carrier, a hay truck. Any reasonable person would think, of course they can use it. They always have. The bank read his letter and gave a deadline. Access exception resolved by close of business Monday, October 26, or the commitment expires and the draw does not fund. 6 days. I opened the file drawer behind my desk. 15 envelopes, each with a January postmark, each with the return receipt still stapled to it, because Ed Halverson mailed them back and I never threw one away. Each says the same thing. Ed Halverson has permission to use the lane across parcel 0041. The permission is personal to him, does not run with his land, and may be revoked at any time. Then a line, his signature, and the date, January of 2012 through January of 2026. The last 4 have something in the margin, because after a decade, Ed decided the whole business was funny. The 2023 one says, "Art, we are both going to die before you stop mailing me this." He was half right. Ed passed in March of 2024. His son signed the last 2. A prescriptive easement requires use that is adverse, and adverse means without permission. That is the whole engine of it. Somebody has to be taking something from you for 20 years while you do nothing, and then the law says you waited too long and it is theirs. Ed was not taking anything. Ed asked, in writing, every January, and I granted it, in writing, and both of us signed. You cannot get a prescriptive easement from a road you have permission to use. Permitted use never ripens. I drove copies to the title company myself on Wednesday morning and handed them across the counter to a woman who did not know who I was. That was the argument. Finished. In 11 minutes. I did not do it because I am shrewd. I did it because for 40 years I watched people lose things they were sure they could not lose, and there was always a small thing they quit doing first. I kept doing the small thing. Now the boy. A continuing guarantee is a standing promise. It covers what the lender has advanced and everything it advances in the future, and it stays open until somebody closes it, which means there is always a paragraph about how you close it. In that agreement, it was paragraph 9. Written notice to the lender, effective upon receipt, terminating the guarantor's liability as to all future advances. It does not touch what has already been drawn, but everything after that notice is not his. Every guarantee has a paragraph 9. Nobody reads paragraph 9. In 40 years, I read about 4,000 of them, and I was paid to. The bank had advanced about 400,000 against land worth more than that, so nobody was going to come looking for a 22-year-old. The 6.1 million not yet drawn was the part that would have ended him. Ethan came to the office Wednesday after work and read the notice, all of it, and then I made him read paragraph 9 himself out loud. He signed. We mailed it certified at 4:15 on Wednesday, October 21st. I paid the $8.30 and kept the receipt. Out on the sidewalk, he asked the only question he asked that whole week. He said, "Won't he know it came from you?" And I said, "He'll know Thursday." We mailed it Wednesday. I have been asked since why I did that first, when the gate was still 5 days out and I could have used it as leverage. Because leverage means holding a thing over somebody, and holding it means being willing to let it drop. I was not willing. Thursday, I bought a 12-foot galvanized tube gate, 2 steel posts, 4 bags of concrete, 20 feet of chain, and a padlock. $381 and change. I kept the receipt, because I have kept every receipt in this story, and that is not an accident, that is a career. Franklin was in the parking lot with a post-hole digger in the bed of his truck. He had not said one word about our fight, and neither had I. He said, "Concrete does not like the cold." He was right, and that is the thing that nearly took the whole business down. Friday night, we drove out U-stick with the headlights off the last 200 feet, which was his idea and made us both feel ridiculous. 34 degrees. Concrete needs to stay above about 50 to set the way it should, and there was frost predicted all 3 nights, and the groundbreaking was Monday morning. We dug 2 holes in ground frozen an inch down, set the posts, plumbed them off the tailgate and poured, and laid an insulating blanket over both piers weighted with rocks out of the ditch bank. 4 hours. I am 76, and I did about a third of the work. And I want to be honest about that too. Driving back, he said, he could show up Saturday with a machine and pull those posts out. I said he could. He said, "Then what?" And I said, "Then he does it on ground that is not his, 4 days before he stands up in front of the mayor. He is going to stand in a tent on Monday and believe his lawyer." Saturday, I did not drive out there. Sunday, I did not either. I sat in a 2-room office for 2 days and did not know whether there were 2 steel posts in the ground on U-stick Road or 2 holes. Sunday night, it went down to 29 degrees. Monday morning, I got up at 5 and I shaved, and I put on a pressed tweed jacket and the good shoes, and I stood in front of a mirror and looked at a man I had not seen since 2011. The posts were in the ground. I could see them from 400 feet away, plumb, with the blanket still weighted over the tops and frost on the blanket. They had a tent, white, open on all 4 sides, the kind you rent for a wedding, 40 folding chairs on the dirt, coffee at the back, a tray of pastries nobody was going to touch because it was 38 degrees. 6 shovels stood in a pile of loose dirt a backhoe had dumped there Sunday night. Somebody had spray painted them gold. You could see where the paint ran down the handles. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the way I used to feel outside a house on a claim I already knew would be denied. For 15 years I wore a canvas coat and boots. I was not in disguise. I never said a false word to anybody. I just did not correct anyone, and it turns out you can go a very long way in this world without correcting anyone. That Monday, I wore a pressed jacket, a knit tie, and shoes I had polished the night before. I did not have a cane, because I have never had a cane. I walked in at the pace of a man with an appointment. Ethan was on my left, Franklin behind us with a folder under his arm. Sheila saw me first. She was at the edge of the tent with a clipboard, and she looked up at 3 people crossing the dirt and looked back down. Then she looked up again. I watched a woman do arithmetic. 15 years, a face, a jacket, and the boy walking next to it. She put her hand on the back of a folding chair. Kevin had arrived early, 51 years old in a gray overcoat, and he was good at that part. I will give him that. He shook the mayor's hand. He shook hands with 2 men who had driven up from Salt Lake. He said something to a reporter that made the man laugh and write. He had a lawyer's letter in his pocket, and he believed it. He was not pretending. He believed this Monday was the best day of his life. I was not going to speak first. 40 years watching adjusters lose arguments they had already won because they opened their mouths taught me that. You put the document on the table and you sit back. So I walked past the tent. I did not stop. I did not look at my son. I did not look at anybody. I went 60 feet past the back row of chairs, out to where the gravel meets Eustic Road, and opened the tailgate of Franklin's truck and took out the gate. A 12-foot galvanized tube gate weighs about 90 pounds. Ethan carried the far end. You could hear it. Galvanized pipe rings when you move it. And 40 people in a tent with the wind down heard a metal sound behind them and turned around. We set it on the hinge pins. It took 3 tries because the pins were new. Then I swung it across the mouth of that lane, ran the chain through the frame and around the post, and set the padlock and pushed it shut with my thumb. It is a small sound, a padlock closing. It was the only sound in that field. I walked back toward the tent, and I still had not said anything, and 40 people watched an old man in a tweed jacket come toward them from a locked gate. The woman from the title company was at the coffee table, the only person there in a blazer holding a portfolio and not talking to anybody. Franklin handed me the folder, and I handed it to her. I said, "Ma'am, I believe you have an exception on this file." That is the only sentence I said out loud in front of everybody that morning. She opened it, standing up. The deed with the legal description on top, and the lane not in it. 15 tax receipts, oldest first. 15 license agreements signed every January. The recorded revocation with the county stamp on it. She read the first page. Then she went to the tax receipts and did the thing people who work with paper do, which is that she did not read them. She fanned the corner with her thumb and counted them. She looked up, not at me. She looked at my son and said, "Kevin, who is this?" He looked at her, he looked at me. He looked at the 2 men from Salt Lake who were watching him now and not the tent. And he said, "Nobody. He's nobody." I do not think he was disowning me. I think he was managing a room. There were investors 10 feet away, and a reporter and a mayor, and he had 2 seconds to decide what that man at the gate was, and he chose the answer that made the problem smallest. But you do not reach for a word like nobody unless it has been sitting somewhere in you, ready, for a long time. And that is when Ethan stepped forward. He had not said one word since we got out of the car. He said, "He's my grandfather." He did not say it loud. 40 people heard it. The mayor turned his head. The reporter stopped writing, looked up, and then started writing much faster. Sheila put both hands on the back of that chair, because now it was not a stranger with a gate. It was a family, and everybody in that field was suddenly inside something private, and 40 people had the same thought at the same time, which is, what did this man do to his father? One of the men from Salt Lake took out his phone. He looked at the gate, and at the folder against the woman's chest, and he walked toward the parked cars with the phone against his ear, and his partner followed him. That was it. 6 days, 15 years, $381 of steel, and it ended with a man in a good overcoat walking to his car in a dirt lot. Dale Whitcomb went first. 6 years, my son's partner, and he stood 4 feet from the reporter and said, "At a volume that was chosen, I came in on the land only. I never had anything to do with how those parcels were acquired." Then Sheila came around the end of the chairs and stood in front of my son and did not lower her voice. "Is the Boise account in my name or yours? Not what happened, not who is this man, not is your father alive?" And Kevin did not answer fast enough. There was a half-second in it, and she picked up her handbag and walked to her car. He built that marriage the way he built everything else, on the idea that he could talk his way through the next second. And he ran out of seconds in front of the one person who had been keeping count. He said, You want to know what I couldn't forgive? I said nothing. It wasn't the money. For 30 years you appraised everything. The roof, the transmission, the neighbors, me. You'd walk into a room, and I could watch you putting a number on it, and the number was never good. And then he said the thing I have been carrying since. When Mom was sick, I drove her to Rochester every other Tuesday for 11 months. You never asked me once what it cost me. You wrote down the mileage, Dad. I found the notebook. You wrote down the mileage. I want to stop here, because you have been with me for an hour, and you have been on my side, and I have to tell you that he was right. There is a leather notebook in a cardboard box in my office. The back half is mileage, because I logged everything for 40 years, and in 2008 and 2009 there are 11 months of entries for a car I was not driving. He drove her. 11 months, Nampa to Rochester and back, and I wrote down the miles so I could deduct them. I do not have a defense. I have an explanation, and it is a poor one, which is that I did not know how to be in that car, and I did know how to keep a ledger. That is what I did with my whole life. Something terrible would happen, and I would arrive with a clipboard and turn it into a number, because a number is a thing you can hold. I did that to my wife's illness, and my son sat in the driver's seat for 11 months and watched me do it. That does not buy back a house, or 15 years, or a stone in a cemetery. Nothing he said out there changes one document. But I am not going to stand here at 76 and let you believe I was only a man that things were done to. He waited for an answer, and I did not have one, so he did the other thing. He got quiet and said Dad 4 times in about 20 seconds. Dad, listen. Dad, we can fix this. Dad, Dad, please. And he offered me $200,000 for the strip. He did not have $200,000. Everyone in that field knew it, including him. It was not an offer. It was a sentence he hoped would work. I said, Kevin, there is a stone in Cloverdale with my name on it, and a boy put flowers on it for 15 years, and not one of you ever corrected him. A man does not sell land to people who have already buried him. Go home. I walked to the title officer and gave her the key to the padlock. Not to him, to her. I said, when somebody buys this parcel from me the right way, they get the key. It will not be him. The rest goes quickly, because the aftermath is never the interesting part. The loan commitment expired that Friday. The examination found a new shortage in the trust account, and his license was suspended in March. The bank foreclosed in the spring, and because Kevin had guaranteed a piece of it himself in 2024, he filed bankruptcy in June. Sheila filed in April. I did not attend any of it. There is a version of a man who sits in the back row of those rooms, and I did not want to become him. Our notice reached the bank 4 days before the draw would have funded. Nobody ever came looking for Ethan Nyquist, and he does not owe $1. He went back to school in January, and in the summers he rides along with me. He sits in the passenger seat of my truck while I go up on a roof and chalk the test squares, and he asks me what the number is on the way home. I am aware of what that is. I think about it every time. The following September, I sold the strip to the developer who bought the 22 acres from the bank. I named a price and he took it without countering, which told me it was low. $140,000. That is not what the ground is worth. Ground like that is worth $9,000. It is what a key is worth. I signed on a Tuesday and walked out to the parking lot, and I did not drive out U-Stick to look at it. I thought about it in the car. I decided not to. Then I opened the envelope. 15 years, folded once down the middle, and I never once looked inside. 100, 2 20s, and a 10. I called Ethan and took him to breakfast the next morning at a place on Fairview. It came to $22.16, and I paid it with my son's money and left the rest of the 10 on the table. $120 came home with me. It is in the drawer under the barometer, and it will be there when I am not. Here is what I have got, and then I will let you go. I am not going to tell you to get even with anybody. I do not think what happened out there was justice. Justice would have been in 2011, in a room with a judge in it, and I did not go, and a lot of what came after is on me for that. What I have is smaller, and I think it is worth more. Read what you sign. Read it in your own kitchen, with your glasses on, while somebody who loves you waits. Pay the small bill. $96 a year for the thing nobody wants. That is what saved me. Not courage, not cleverness. $96 a year and 15 January letters to a farmer who thought I was funny. And keep the paper. Keep it because there may come a morning when you are the only one telling the truth in the room, and without the paper you will just be an old man saying so. I still tap the glass on that barometer every morning. Ruth gave it to me in 1984, and the needle has been sitting on change the whole time, and I have stopped expecting it to move. It is a good instrument. It just tells you the pressure is dropping. It does not tell you when. Thank you for staying with me. If any of this sounded like something in your own family, put it in the comments, because somebody listening is going to need to know they are not the only one. And if you have got papers in a drawer you have not looked at in a while, go look at them tonight.